So I'm going to start by introducing myself. So bear with me, I hope you're all settled. Okay. My name's Tracy and I joined Extinction Rebellion in October. I've got no previous experience of being an activist. I had no knowledge or interest in politics, the economy, or like real British history. After I heard girls heading for Extinction talk in October, I had to go to London. It was a real gut feeling, and I hadn't actually left my house on my own for quite a while, so I'm sure a lot of you have also had that, oh my God, where are we at? I didn't really want to be a rebel, so when I came home, I went to a council meeting, and it was a task and finish group because my council declared an emergency too. But it was pointless. At one point, one of the councillors said, we can't tell people the truth unless we make it happy because people just get depressed and do nothing, and that made me furious. And I actually shouted in that meeting that, or start coming to your meetings. As it turns out, he was a bit right, and only 30% of us will act. So I'm really grateful to you all for being here tonight. We worked really well as a team when I first joined XRMK. We did increase the number of people going to their meetings, but then the election happened. And my gut feeling was I just wanted to go and squat in my community centre. I had a real need to be in the community and to start telling people the truth. But what we agreed instead was to hold a hustings. And we did that, but we couldn't even get the group to put a stuffed toy in place of the Tory MPs who wouldn't turn up. And all this time I was struggling to understand my own motivations and what was really going on, you know, having no experience of politics or knowledge of economics or anything. I was just in a real place of fear. So I joined Extinction Rebellion working class just after that election. I can't explain how visceral that feeling I had when Labour lost, how it really hit me hard. So I'd gone from zero interest in politics to fully believing that change was possible through politics to thinking, oh my God, that system is totally broken. There's no way we can win using politics and traditional methods. I'd been talking to some friends who were psychologists. You know, the regeneration side of XR is really important. And in understanding that and learning more about our policies and economics, I actually found out there was a group of psychologists who about 20 years ago said we couldn't talk about class anymore. And that didn't feel quite right to me. So I was drawn to the working class group to try and further my own understanding. And also, you know, if I'm going to be on the front line, I want to be with people like my cousins and my uncles. So I also have an inconsistent disability, fibromyalgia. Lockdown, for me, really opened my world up. I wasn't the only person stuck in my house anymore. And through Zoom, I've been able to make many meetings that I wouldn't have been able to previously, physically. And because, you know, I'm meeting people all over the place now. Sorry. So before becoming a rebel, capitalism felt to me a bit like gravity. It hurts if you fall, but you can't change it. You just mustn't stumble. I didn't trust politicians, but I had no idea how corrupt and controlled the media was, how many lies we've been told about our own history. I didn't understand that Exxon's lie about their business dealing 40 years ago had really spread out into all of our politics and corrupted that whole system. As I started to understand these things, and my own gut reactions better, I started naming some of them fears. For me, freedom and economics, my fear dropped. You know, there is no freedom without truth, and in understanding these things and grasping them, and you know, it's freeing in a real big way. So to me, freedom and economics, that system, that's what's responsible for the climate collapse that's on our doorstep. You know, that system is already killing people in the UK today. The disability PIP system and the amount of people in poverty, for me, they're necessary sacrifices to this idea of the economy so that few can hoard. And to me, this is criminal. This selfish 40-year experiment of free markets has been an abject failure, and those making well out of it, they can't stop it. So we must. It's not a free-for-all market, it's just a free-for-all that's resulting in the genocide and extinction of so much in our world, possibly all of it. One of the things that annoys me the most about our response to the virus is the 2016 sickness report, or rather the burying of that report. Not just that they didn't prepare PPE, not just that they kept stripping the hospitals, but just like at that first council meeting I went to when they said they can't tell us the truth, they chose not to prepare us, not to allow us to prepare ourselves. And for me, it's obvious that lockdown would have been much easier and less painful for many of us if we'd been allowed to prepare in our communities. And I think the same with the climate crisis. In tackling the climate crisis, it has to involve community organising. I'm certain that racism is an integral part of capitalism, that poverty is a choice, that this out of control, greedy economic theory has got to be given up. The bankers cannot control themselves. 2008 proved that. Politics has been corrupted by business and lobbying. And I'm certain that without civil disobedience, without those of us that can kicking up a stink, nothing will change. The truth is some of us are being hurt by this system right now. Disabled people are dying in our thousands. And they're using magistrates' courts against us to make us defend our vulnerabilities. Well, if they want me in court, some of that is going to be on my terms too. The social contract has been broken and it's our responsibility to stand up to it. So that's me and who I am. And a man that's really inspired me and helped me learn about the miners' strikes and things is Mike Jackson. So Mike, would you like to talk next?
I'll just introduce myself. My name's Mike Jackson. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my quite a lot about my personal life because I think it's relevant. I started work in 1970 in the land-based sector, the horticulture industry, and retired after 50 years in the industry last Christmas. Lucky me, not working anymore. I'd grown up in what was still a predominantly working class and industrial town in Lancashire. Factories, railways, cotton mills and our homes were belching out coal smoke, and on top of this there was the stink of other industries such as gas and chemical works. The stone-built houses where we lived were literally black with a century of pollution. And when smogs descended, they were choking, and you hurried to get home and close the door until that smog had lifted. The despoiling of the environment was visible all around. So I started work in the year 1970. By the mid-1970s, a new phrase emerged: global warming. It was said to be due to carbon dioxide emissions by industries. And I remember as a young man reading about it and thinking that this must be very serious because the global elites would surely suppress this if they could. At the same time, all this industry provided jobs, and no matter how hard, deafening, dangerous or monotonous, people had to provide for their families. Just half of Britain's working population was in a trade union. That was about 14 million people. And the unions were fighting hard to improve the wages and working conditions, and they were gaining ground. I joined a union at 16 years old, and I've been in a union most of my life since then. Then, in 1979, in May, a Conservative government was elected under the leadership of Margaret Hilda Thatcher. She and her closest allies clearly wanted to wage a war on the trade union movement. They bided the time strategically, and then in March 1984, in their second term of office, the then state-owned monopoly of British Coal announced the closure of a number of coal mines, which meant 20,000 miners would lose their jobs. The guy who was heading the National Coal Board, by the way, was appointed personally by Thatcher, a hatchet man who closed loads of jobs in the steel industry, called Ian McGregor. And he was brought in basically to close down the coal industry as far as we're concerned. So he said 20,000 miners would lose their job. The miners' leader, Arthur Scargill, said that they were lying, and the figure was more like 70,000 jobs that would be lost. And if you think of the miners' families, etc., this is hundreds of thousands of lives that will be devastated by this. Cabinet papers released just 5 years ago proved that Scargill was correct and Thatcher had lied about the numbers of redundancies that were going to make. The miners had no choice but to strike to try and protect their industry, their jobs. It was a monumental struggle which lasted a year. Thatcher's government used the full force of the state to crush the miners, including the union's assets, to try and starve the miners back to work. She sequestered the assets. The NUM, therefore, as a response, put out a global call to all their supporters to twin with individual mining communities, because donating funds to the union itself was pointless because the government would seize that money. Together with a friend, Mark Ashton, we set up a lesbian and gay support group to raise funds for the striking miners and twinned with the mining community in South Wales. Now, you must bear in mind, this is 35 years ago, and attitudes to lesbians and gays were very different then, and there was absolutely no protective legislation. We had no rights whatsoever. But we went into that mining community unconditionally. We were activists, we were young, we were used to fighting homophobia every day of our lives, and we expected some of the miners to be homophobic. You know, the miners that are not at the zeitgeist of, you know, of human existence in that respect. But we knew if the miners lost, then it would be a serious blow to the entire trade union movement and all that comes with that. We were offering solidarity, not altruism. Sadly, Thatcher did win. And we now have a trade union movement half the size as it was then, tied up by restrictive anti-trade union legislation. The miners were beaten, but not bowed. They turned to us and said that it was their turn to support us, and they did. In 1985, 6 months after their defeat at both the Trade Union Congress and Labour Party conferences, the miners let it be known that they were completely supporting LGBT resolutions. Incidentally, LGBT resolutions have been put to both conferences, the TUC and Labour Party, for many years before that, and they failed every time. But with the support of the miners, all those previous conference decisions were overturned, and resoundingly LGBT rights were embraced by the trade union movement and the Labour Party. And that really was such a significant moment, because immediately after that conference, the trade union movement started to enact basically gay rights at work. So people who were sacked for being gay, which you could be quite legitimately, then the trade union would defend them against an employer and say, you can't do this, it's just not fair. And of course, many years later, the return of a Labour government after the nightmare years of Thatcher and her Tory successors, we actually started to get the implementation of LGBT legislation to give us those rights. No one knew then that 30 years later, a movie called Plied would be released, telling this story across the world, winning many awards. Thatcher and her government kick-started the nightmare of neoliberalism across the world. Their ideology is to shrink the role of government to that simply of administration, and to allow almost limitless freedom to corporations. And 40 years later, that is unfolding with ever more dire consequences. 35 years ago, Britain led the world in what was called clean coal technology. It wasn't perfect, but we acknowledged it, and we were leading the world in trying to resist the kind of worst excesses of carbon release into the atmosphere. But Thatcher's government stopped that research. And now, of course, we acknowledge that fossil fuel extraction must stop. But actually, the corporations are now tapping into even more dangerous fossil fuels, such as fracked gas and tar sands in Canada, whilst coal mining continues unabated. The climate crisis is the biggest threat we have seen in all of human history. Another world, though, is possible, and one where we can simultaneously address global economic injustice by fighting the ideology of neoliberalism worldwide and using and seeking clean, restorative industries. We can and must bring the whole global human race together in solidarity, fighting for the future for ourselves and all future generations. Quite simply, the kids come next. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand that period of our history. It has an awful lot to do with a lot of police powers that are around today, on top of everything else Mike talked about. And for me, there's real hope in the gays and the miners coming together, finding common ground and supporting each other. You know, it's really inspirational. Our next speaker is another working class girl who's, wonderful. Gail, have you been unmuted?
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks, Mike. It's a real honour to meet you. My dad was a coal miner, and actually I just want to cry, to be really honest. Yeah, so it's a real honour to meet you. That's all I can say at this moment. I'm not usually lost for words. It's also a big deal for me to be in a group of working class people in XR. I sometimes get called middle class, and I'm educated, I've got a PhD, I can really rock with the middle class folks. I can put it on, I know what to do. I've got the called the social and cultural capital. I know how to be in those spaces. It's really fucking painful if you're upwardly mobile. You're not like 18 and you're working class, and then you go to university and suddenly you're turned into something else. You have to go through this process of upward mobility, which is really like a process of humiliation, I would say, and learning how to cope with it. I see Tristan nodding with familiarity, just wondering what the fuck's going off, what all the rules are, how everybody else seems to know what's going off, and not even knowing that's what's going off. It's really confusing. And I think activist spaces can feel like that as well, you know. Yeah, what was going to talk about that to an extent. Johnny Vegas, by the way, said, I like, you know, Johnny Vegas, he said, how I don't want to see, I can see myself, that's too much. He said, how do you know somebody who you've only just met is from Yorkshire? It's because they've already told you. So I might live in Stroud. I'm from Yorkshire, and I'm very proud of it. And I guess what I wanted to say something about really was, it's a bit of a fancy phrase, but internalised oppression. What internalised oppression means for working class people. It looks like not trusting our own mind. It looks like feeling a lack of confidence, or another version of it is really hamming up our confidence in order to sort of make up for that place where we don't feel enough self-worth. And I suppose that is the benefit of an education system, is it keeps reflecting back to you that you got the right answer, you've done the right thing, and you sort of especially actually for working class girls, there's some place where it kind of keeps us a bit small as well, because we learn how to fit in. And I think you just did a brilliant job, Tracy, of modelling what we have to do, which is get the fuck over it and do it anyway, no matter what it feels like, and how scared we feel, and how inadequate we feel, how we feel it's not us that are meant to do this, it's somebody else. And the other thing is, you know, and again, Mike, thanks for bringing the pride and LGBTQ plus, I hope I said that right, changes every year, doesn't it? Just to say it. So you feel like you're not going to get it right, but into the space, because the other piece here is the reason why we lose is because we get divided from each other. We get divided viciously from ourselves. You're stupid, you're not worth anything, what you're supposed to be doing is sweeping the streets. There's a version of that running for pretty much all working class people. And obviously we get divided around gender and sexuality and so on. And what a tragedy, George Floyd's death, what an amazing awakening to racism and to new conversations about colonialism. And that is, in my view, it's not competition or anything, but like the division that's especially put in the working class. And I don't know if anybody else has that joy of, you know, your working class family who sends you stuff that you're like mortified about. Try and argue with them. But we've got the work of Ian Haney Lopez to fall back on now, which is the understanding that if we talk about white supremacy and white privilege and all that, which is definitely something we need to raise consciousness about, it doesn't land well with a lot of people. It's talking about how racism is used to divide us. And when you see the history of colonialism, the idea of whiteness was invented to separate workers, make some feel just a little bit better so they couldn't get together and couldn't challenge the dominant classes. By the way, a friend of mine gave me a brilliant push back on the whole statue protectors, if you've got any of your family sending you statue protectors stuff. And so it's this, you know, I sort of sent this thing round to some other folks saying, this guy's had his grave, he's had his statue pulled down, he had his grave defaced and plaques about him graffitied on. Don't people realise how much money he did? And Jimmy Savile, so like, who by the way worked in my dad's coal mine. So it's finding, you know, there has to be some humour, don't they? The other thing that happens in activist spaces that just makes me feel a bit odd to it. You feel a bit tight and you're supposed to do it a certain way, and it just makes me want to swear. I don't mean in anger, just need to get a bit sweary to get over it. And I just think people need to be themselves, and authenticity. I mean, actually something Roger often says, authenticity is like the number one language that everybody understands. And so treating each other with grace if we get things wrong, you know, assuming goodwill between us all, that we mean well and we're trying to get it right. We just have to take care, don't make each other feel stupid. It's just like, it's like the big gaping wound, isn't it? Like, be nice to each other, love each other. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I'm a bit of a hippie. So that's all I wanted to say, I think. It's a real honour to be here. Lots of love.
Oh, thanks, Gail. That's, yeah, really touching. Thank you. And Ian Haney-Lopez, that's a great recommendation. If you haven't seen any of his stuff, I really recommend it. Okay, it's time for our resident troublemaker, a man who's really helped me understand a lot of history and some theories of change. I'm really grateful I met him. Roger, are you ready?
Yeah, I guess so. I can't actually see anyone, so I presume there are people out there. It's a bit weird, isn't it? This endless Zoom thing. But yeah, well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I've been really looking forward to it. I'm a little bit nervous because I always am. But yeah, so I want to say a few things. I've got quite a few things to say, of course, so I'll try not to go on too long. But yeah, the first thing I want to say is that I was brought up in Bredbury near Stockport on the foothills of the Pennines, where it rains every day, in a working class community. And I couldn't wait to get away, not least because of the rain, actually. But, you know, like, I've been thinking about my roots a lot more since getting involved in Extinction Rebellion, because you sort of need to have some roots, don't you, to deal with all this stuff. You know, it's like, if you don't know where you're coming from, you're pretty lost. And, you know, my mum and dad have died now, but they were obviously a massive influence on me. And being, you know, in Manchester and what have you, I should probably know there's this phrase, isn't there, call a spade a spade. And I think that's one of my guiding principles, which is probably why I get into trouble quite a lot, because I really can't be asked, you know, lying about things. I just, you know, I'm 54 and I've had a pretty hard life, and I really can't be bothered doing that whole routine that goes on, particularly around the whole climate thing. So I've been thinking, like, I totally, like, can't think of the right phrase, but it's something like, you know, we're entering a total shit show, right? That's the sort of thing that came to mind this afternoon, you know, to summarize what's going on here. You know, it's not like we're entering a period of climate change. We're entering a fucking shit show. That's what we're entering, right? Let's just call a spade a spade. And I'm in this ridiculous situation that, you know, I spent 20 years hardly seeing anyone growing vegetables in Wales, and then I've been propelled into this semi-famous role of talking to these top scientists around the world, and it's the maddest lifestyle. I can't imagine it being more mad, because, you know, everyone's just trundling along, and then, you know, every week or so I talk to some scientists. Like, I talked to this scientist 2 weeks ago, and as some of you may know, like, there's this report come out that we're heading for 5 degrees centigrade locked in by mid-century. And, you know, there's a little bit of controversy about it, you know, whether it's locked in mid-century or it's going to take 100 years for it to come through, as if that's really very relevant, you know, whether everyone's going to die this century or next century, well, whatever. Anyway, I asked this scientist, you know, he's been in the IPCC for 20 years or whatever, he's a top scientist. And he said, I said, so what do you think about this 5 degree business, you know, expecting him to get all sort of like provisional about it. He said, Roger, yeah, it's wrong. It's 6 degrees because they haven't factored in the carbon, the loss of the carbon sinks. I was just going, oh, right, okay. And then, you know, a week later, I was talking to this professor of Arctic ice, you know, he's been 30 years at a top global university. And I was saying, so, you know, the Arctic ice in you know, when is it going to be going in the summer? And, you know, there's various official papers saying it's 2035. And he just said deadpan to me, you know, it was the most obvious thing in the world. He said, yeah, well, we've gone by 2025. 2025, you know, all right, 5 years, you know, and some of you may know, like the president of Finland said, when we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe, you know, and that's one of those not calling a spade sort of phrase, isn't it? We lose the globe. What the fuck does that mean? Well, we know what it means because I talked to another, like, you know, expert, and he said at 4 degrees, so just at 4 degrees, half the world's uninhabitable. So what does that mean? You know, what does it mean? Let's just think about it. I think about it every day. It does my head in. It's billions of people dying in indescribable pain. You know, this is not a social issue. It's not another campaign. It's off the scale. It's totally off the scale. And I don't know, you know, I'm just some farmer from Wales. I don't know how to emotionally communicate it. I just come out with it and hope for the best, you know. And I suppose the reason I'm on this call and the reason I've been trying to promote the working class side of things is that as far as I can see, the working class is on the front line. It's always been on the front line. It will always be on the front line. It's definitely on the front line at the moment with the whole COVID thing. You know, it's an absolute scandal that it's the poor people that are dying in the vast majority of cases. It's an absolute scandal that we've got, 2 million kids in this country going hungry. You know, I was a young man in the early 80s. No one went hungry then. I was like, oh, that's something that happens to other countries. And we've got like 2,000 kids being admitted to hospital for malnutrition. What the fuck's going on? I mean, we know what's going on, which is this country is run by the eating elite. They don't give a damn about poor people. They never did, and they never will. And that's the point where the penny drops. And the penny drops when we realize that these people are going to have us die. That's what's happening here. Right? It's happened century, and, you know, I've been reading about Peterloo. Thought I'd read up about what they used to do to people. 600 people slashed with swords in 1819, right? This is the tradition of the ruling class in this country. And in this present iteration, and not talking about just, you know, doing down the working class, this is a mass genocide project. There's no other word for it, you know, it's off the scale. And so what I want to like try and convey here is what I think working class people, what I want working class people to do and myself to do, and maybe I'm putting this in the wrong way, is we need to get out into working class spaces and just tell people a spade is a spade. I hear all this stuff about, oh, you know, poor people can't be told the truth. You know, they can't really do anything. We need to be careful. It's all bollocks as far as I'm concerned. They have as much right to know. They are going to be the people actually going to do something about it. And what I think we should be doing is going into working class spaces and just belting out this information in its raw emotional, you know, state. You know, whether it makes people cry, that's all good, right? Because that's where we're at with it. And we need to go to trade unions. And, you know, when the trade unions go, you know, I've been to trade unions say, yeah, we'll put it on the agenda next month. Like, that's not good enough. We're talking about the future of people's lives here. You know, if they are going to put it on the agenda next month, then let's go in next week and throw paint in the foyer. That will wake them up. I did that at King's College, right? That woke them up. That's how change is created, you know? And when we go to the councils and they say, yeah, we're going to talk about it, you know, in 2 months' time, then take the super glue and blockade the doors. That will wake them up. That's the sort of thing that we need to be doing, you know, because it's massive, right? I'm not saying this because I'm some mad radical. I just want to grow vegetables, right? The only reason I'm here is because the whole thing's fucked. You know, there's no choice. That's why I'm here. I don't want to be saying all this stuff, but that's where we're at. And the other thing I just want to come back to, this whole sort of fragility of poor people rubbish, right? As far as I'm concerned, the only times that things change, and things have changed in this country, is when the working class gets involved, you know? Like if you look at the suffragettes, it was working class women on the front line. You know, Mike's just told us about the miners' strike. We know about the miners' strike. We know about the poll tax, right? It was when working class communities got involved. That's when change has happened. In 2012, with the student loans protests, right? Something I've studied. You know, all the kids from the posh universities didn't change things. It was when the working class students from community colleges got involved. That's when the fuss starts happening. And that's why we need the working class mobilized on the climate crisis, because it's for them. It's not like following some middle class agenda. It's because that's what it's about. And I did some speeches last year, and it was in the working class communities where I got the best response. It wasn't in Brighton and North London. It was in Scunthorpe and Sunderland. That's where people were coming forward going, okay, what's the deal, right? Okay, we've got to get arrested. Who's going to look after my dog, you know? It was like, let's get on with it. It was in those communities that people were coming forward. And the reason for that, we know what the reason is because working class people haven't got skin in the game. It's because working class people know how hard life can be. So they're more resilient, you know? And finally, it's because they know they're going to get hurt first. That's the message. They're going to get hurt first because they always get hurt first, because that's the deal, right? So I've been, as some of you know, I've been getting involved in this new political party, like Beyond Politics. They're doing some research, right? And I just want to finish, well, I just want to quote this. I think it's really good. Like in the French Revolution, in the Constitution, they said, like, when shit's happening, you know, when the government plans the death of ordinary people, I'll quote it, it's the sacred right and the indispensable duty of ordinary people to rebel, right? The sacred right and the indispensable duty. This isn't some consumer option, right? This is the way it is. So I just want to finish with the other phrase that comes to me from my youth is, you know, a lot of people when I was young, they just got on with stuff, right? Life was shit, but they just got on with stuff. And I remember, you know, my mum and my dad saying to me, you know, just get on with the job, Roger. Just get on with the job. So that's what I'm going to leave you with is, you know, we know all this is happening. We don't want any massive dramas. We don't want, like, you know, loads of more Zoom calls. We need to get on with the job, and we know what that job is. That's it.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, it's really hard talking in public and to keep coming with your truths and being blunt. I really appreciate it. It's difficult. And I think we have a secret weapon as well as working class people. We know the power of community. I think for us, it's less scary to think that we might have a bit less if that means that everybody else has the same, you know. So I think we've got some secret powers and instincts that maybe they haven't got. So yeah, thanks very, very much, Roger. Eve, can we please unlock Eve?
I'm unlocked. Hi, I'm Eve. I'm not quite sure how I follow Roger. I think I've got the short straw somehow, but I'm one of the team. I live in Pompey or Portsmouth, if you don't know where that is. And I know I don't sound like it, but my dad was actually a miner as well, from Durham. So something we've got in common, it seems. Anyway, I'm fairly new to the game. I think I was a bit blind, really, to the big picture of what was happening with the climate. until I saw XR on the telly in October, and I suddenly thought, what's all this, and started looking into it, and then I started finding out the stuff that was going on. I think I was so tied up with my own work and my life. I used to work with children and families, but I didn't seem to have any time or energy for anything else. But that sort of spurred me on. So my first actions with XR weren't until December, when I was on crutches after having a knee operation. And I really wanted to get into doing stuff in working class areas. That was what I was keen to do. I wanted to hear what working class people was thinking about things, what mattered for them, what they thought about this stuff, and see why there weren't more working class people involved. And then I heard about the national group being set up, and I thought, oh, I'm going to find out a bit more about that. And it's been really good, because I feel as though I'm with kindred spirits, and we've had loads of discussion about being working class and what it means, and why do we need to have a separate group. But I think all these things that people are saying, and lots of you in the chat also, you can see that it's, the climate obviously is about everybody, but for me, I don't see any distinction between the abuse of the planet and the abuse of working class people by the rich and powerful. And I don't see that there can be a world for my grandchildren or any other children if I don't do something different and do it now. And I've wasted too many years doing the same old things that don't work. And so, although I've never been arrested before, I think I might have to be, if that's what it takes, actually putting yourself out there and standing up for people perhaps that can't. And so I'm hoping some of you might want to come and join XR Working Class, might get involved in some of the actions. Some of you might be prepared to get arrested, but if you don't or you can't, then there's other things that people can do that are there to support everybody. There's a space for everybody in XR to do something, to go out there shouting and telling people, go out and listen to what people in your communities are saying about what it's like, and fight for the things that they are wanting and needing, alongside fighting for the climate, because we need your skills, your brains, your passion, if we're going to succeed. Or bloody die trying, at least. That's what I'm going to do. So, thank you.
You followed him admirably, Eve. Thank you very much. He's a real backbone of this group. Thank you. Hamish is up next.
Yeah, I'm off mute. Hi everyone. We all know we need to be part of a genuine mass movement, and I'm part of this team now. It's a small team. We want to grow, and we want people to help us and get involved and make this a real movement, a real shift in direction that enables XR to become part of a mass movement in a way perhaps right now it's not able to. There's so much to say, and one of the things that I've got to say as part of what I'm talking about now is what we're actually asking, what we're actually proposing a little bit. Talk about what our steps can be. Phoenix was going to introduce something about that. I'll try to touch on that a bit as well. But I suppose one of the key things you can say is that people have been rebelling against extinction for centuries already. This isn't a new thing. Yeah, it's getting worse and worse because of the intensity of industrial development over the last 200 years. But the people all over the world have been fighting for their lives and for their existence due to this system's kind of desire to grind everything up for its needs and for its profit, basically. So there's a lot of things you could say about that, and I think that, you know, those discussions are ongoing, and we have those discussions a lot about how we need to make those connections and put injustice at the centre of things. And I think that would be one thing. If I was to say one thing about why we're all here, I would say that this is as much an injustice rebellion, a rebellion against injustice and inequality, as it is a rebellion against extinction, and that the two things effectively are the same. You know, they reinforce each other, and that the possibility of extinction for millions of species, and should we say the loss of millions and billions of lives, comes from that inequality. It comes from that exploitation. It's fairly clear that, and we know that. And as working class people, we feel that there's an absolutely an intense need to address that inequality, without which we'll never get anywhere with any of the issues we have. And that cuts across all the campaigns for justice, of which you could say the great extinction of life is perhaps the ultimate injustice. But they're inseparable. But I'm not going to go on more about that. I want to talk more about briefly about, you know, what we're actually going to do. Roger mentioned the communication. So yes, there's an absolute need for the understanding of what we call the climate and ecological emergency. The understanding of that to be communicated clearly between us all, between every community. That is no doubt about the necessity for that. But it's a two-way dialogue. There is a need for surely for an exchange of ideas and understanding that enables that mass movement to be built, that brings in so much more than just the kind of the campaigners and Extinction Rebellion is one of them. Of course, those are all good starting points to bring people together. But this is about dialogue. It's about collaboration. It's about shared understanding and growing together. What are the key things we can do about that? Well, as has been mentioned, part of that is about making connections with as many different communities, as many different people as possible. You know, that is key. One of those key connections is organised labour, the trade union movement. Now we know that the trade union movement has been reduced in its scope and scale by the onslaught of multiple governments, and in many ways we know that it's hamstrung in many ways, but there's still a huge amount of power there at the grassroots rank and file level if we have that communication. One of the things that we've been talking about in the XR trade union group, which is kind of closely affiliated with this group, you know, we're working in tandem, in parallel and overlap, is the need for, where possible, whenever possible, people to join trade unions and to share that information in both directions, in all directions, multiple directions, where not only can people go to have conversations about the crisis, the emergency that we face in terms of ecology, we also have the crisis, as we see now, of loss of livelihood, approaching famine all around the world. You know, this trade union movement isn't just in this country. You know, it's an expansive thing. There are international organisations, and this effort to create a much deeper, broader network of understanding goes beyond the UK's borders. That's for sure. It goes beyond the borders of communities, whilst respecting the various different problems that we all each faces. And a lot does need to be. I just want to move on because I know that I haven't got too much more time. But one of the things that's central to that, I think, is the scope for building much stronger communities that have, as Gail put it, the confidence to step up and grow and defend themselves in a way that is difficult has become much more difficult in this country, at least, or because of the breakdown of unions, the separation of people from a sense of community. That needs to be re-established, and that is a massive project again that goes beyond what XR does. But it's going to be key to any kind of challenge to the system and to prevent what's coming. There's no way we can do that without a real genuine solidarity, because it's all very well talking about mass civil disobedience in London on a few monthly basis. But we all know, really, when it comes to it, this is going to be a monumental struggle, and we're going to have to be able to support each other. And that community, mutual support and aid is going to be critical to that, and we have to build that. That has to be part of what we're doing. So what Phoenix was actually going to come on to talk about was the idea of community emergency centres. And I think that is a huge way forward for us also. That can feed into what we call direct action and resistance on the streets. But it also builds that, it can help build that community solidarity, and it can work with existing networks and structures that are there. But what we're hoping to do is create these community emergency, it's a fortunate slip of the tongue there, community emergency centres or climate emergency centres, whichever way you want to describe them. And they can be the backbone of something. And hopefully Phoenix is able, at some point in the near future, Phoenix is going to be able to give us a real good lowdown on that, a real good rundown on the way that works and how that can be established. And they are already getting established in a few places around the UK. I don't know about internationally, but I'm sure there are similar existing things happening, and we need to start trying to help tie those things together. We need to look beyond the model that XR is currently with, and I think that hopefully this group is part of that process. I'm sure there's loads of things more I could have said, but I don't want to rattle on too long, so I'll leave it just there.
Thank you ever so much. Yeah, I don't think we're outnumbered at all. I know there are really so many good people out there and so many of us would care. We're just maybe a bit out organised, and we're going to fix that. So we're going to take a break. We're going to